King David's greatest sin didn't just affect him. It shattered his entire family, causing devastation that would resonate for generations. His choices triggered a chain reaction of betrayal, heartbreak, and tragedy that even reached his only daughter, Tamar. For those who may not be familiar, King David committed a sin so grave, it deeply displeased God and drastically altered the trajectory of his family's legacy. But before we dive into how this sin impacted Tamar and the rest of David's household, let's first take a closer look at the sin itself, the one that set everything in motion. It was springtime, a season when kings typically went to war, and David sent Joab, his trusted commander, and the Israelite army to engage the Ammonites. The campaign began with a siege on the city of Rabbah, but David remained behind in Jerusalem. One sleepless night, driven by restlessness, he decided to take a walk on the roof of his palace. As he gazed over the city, something, or rather someone, caught his eye. A woman of extraordinary beauty was taking a bath. Intrigued, David sent someone to inquire about her identity. The response came back quickly. Her name was Bathsheba, the daughter of Eliam, and the wife of Uriah the Hittite. Now, despite knowing Bathsheba was married, something inside David made him act. He sent for her, and when she came to him, he slept with her. Bathsheba had recently completed her purification rites, a detail that would later complicate the situation. A short time later, Bathsheba discovered she was pregnant, and without hesitation, she sent word to David. This was a problem, a big one. Desperate to cover up his sin, David devised a plan. He sent a message to Joab, instructing him to send Uriah the Hittite back to Jerusalem. When Uriah arrived, David pretended to care about the ongoing battle, inquiring about the troops and the situation with Joab. Afterward, David suggested that Uriah go home to rest, even sending a gift to his house, hoping that Uriah would sleep with his wife, thereby hiding the pregnancy. But Uriah didn't go home. Instead, he spent the night at the palace gates with the king's servants. When David heard of this, he summoned Uriah, confused. "Why didn't you go home to your wife?" he asked. Uriah's response was straightforward and honorable. "The Ark of the Covenant, Israel's army, Joab, and the officers are all out in the open fields. How can I go home to eat, drink, and sleep with my wife while my comrades are out there in battle? I can't do it. I just won't." David, realizing his plan was failing, tried again. He told Uriah to stay another night. That evening, he invited Uriah to dinner and got him drunk, thinking that in his inebriated state, Uriah might finally go home. But even in his drunkenness, Uriah refused to leave the palace. He slept at the palace gates, still remaining loyal to his duty. Out of options, David resorted to a desperate, drastic measure. He wrote a letter to Joab, sealed it, and gave it to Uriah to deliver. Ironically, this letter contained Uriah's own death sentence. It instructed Joab to place Uriah at the front lines of the fiercest battle, and then withdraw the troops, leaving Uriah exposed to certain death. Joab, though reluctant, obeyed the king's orders. He placed Uriah in the most dangerous part of the battle, where the enemy's strongest fighters were located. As expected, Uriah was killed in the conflict, along with several other soldiers. When Joab sent the news of the battle's outcome to David, he carefully instructed the messenger. "If the king gets upset and questions why we fought so close to the city walls, remind him that Uriah the Hittite is dead too." When the messenger delivered the news to David, his response was chillingly cold. "Tell Joab not to be discouraged. The sword kills one as well as another. Keep fighting and take the city. Tell Joab he is doing a good job." After Bathsheba learned of her husband's death, She mourned for him. But once her period of mourning ended, David brought her to the palace, made her his wife, and she bore him a son. Yet, the Bible makes it clear, God was deeply displeased with David's actions. His sin had far-reaching consequences. Following David's grievous sin with Bathsheba and the murder of Uriah, God sent the prophet Nathan to confront him. Nathan came to David with a parable. He told him, "There were two men in a certain city. One was very rich, owning many flocks of sheep and herds of goats. The other was very poor, owning nothing but a single lamb, which he had bought. This lamb was like a daughter to him, his children's pet. He fed it from his own plate, let it drink from his own cup, and even cuddled it in his arms like a baby." The story Nathan shared would ultimately reveal to David just how far he had fallen and the gravity of the sin he had committed. David, moved by the parable, would condemn the rich man in the story, unknowingly condemning himself. This moment would set the stage for David's eventual repentance, but the consequences of his actions had already begun to unfold. A guest arrived at the home of a wealthy man. However, instead of taking a lamb from his own flocks to prepare a meal for the traveler, the rich man took the poor man's only lamb, the one he cherished, and killed it. He roasted it and served it to the guest. Upon hearing this, David became furious. His anger burned hot as he declared, "As surely as the Lord lives, the man who has done this deserves to die. He must repay 4 times over for stealing the lamb and having no pity." At that moment, Nathan, the prophet, revealed the truth. With a stern gaze, he said, "David, you are that man." Nathan continued, delivering God's message. "I made you king over Israel and saved you from the power of Saul. I gave you Saul's palace, his wives, and the kingdoms of Israel and Judah. And if that had not been enough, I would have given you even more. But why, David, have you despised the Lord's commands and done this terrible thing? You have murdered Uriah and stolen his wife. Because of this, from now on, murder will always threaten your household. You have insulted me by taking Uriah's wife, and I will make sure that your own wives will be given to another man. He will publicly sleep with them, in full view of all Israel. You did this in secret, but I will do it openly, before the eyes of everyone." Hearing this, David was overwhelmed with guilt. His heart broke as he realized the depth of his sin. He immediately confessed, saying, "I have sinned against the Lord." Nathan responded, "The Lord has forgiven you, and you will not die for this sin. However, because of your actions, you have given God's enemies an opportunity to mock him. Therefore, the child born to Bathsheba will die." Shortly after, Bathsheba's baby fell critically ill. David was devastated. He fasted, prayed, and lay on the ground, begging God to spare the child. His servants tried to comfort him, urging him to eat, but David refused. He remained in mourning, clinging to hope that God might show mercy. 7 days later, the child died. The servants were hesitant to tell David, fearing his reaction. But David noticed their whispers and asked, "Is the baby dead?" When they confirmed the news, David got up, washed himself, changed his clothes, and went to the tabernacle to worship the Lord. Afterward, he returned to the palace and ate. His servants were confused. "We don't understand," they said. "While the child was alive, you wept and refused to eat. Now that he's gone, you've stopped mourning and are eating again." David explained, "While the child was alive, I fasted and wept, thinking that maybe the Lord would be gracious and allow the child to live. But now that he's gone, why should I fast? I cannot bring him back. One day, I will go to him, but he will not return to me." David then comforted Bathsheba, and in time she gave birth to another son, Solomon. The Lord showed his favor on Solomon, even sending a special blessing through Nathan the prophet. Nathan gave him a nickname, Jedediah, meaning beloved of the Lord. After these events, the consequences of David's sin began to unfold, fulfilling the judgment that God had pronounced through Nathan. The sword of strife and rebellion entered David's household, bringing turmoil and heartbreak. One of David's sons, Prince Absalom, had a sister named Tamar. Tamar was incredibly beautiful, and their half-brother Amnon became obsessed with her. His obsession grew so strong that he became physically ill because he could not figure out how to approach her. At that time, young men and women were kept strictly apart, making it difficult for Amnon to speak with Tamar. He shared his frustration with his crafty cousin, Jonadab, who came up with a plan. "Pretend to be sick," Jonadab suggested. "When your father comes to visit, ask him to send Tamar to prepare some food for you in your room." Amnon agreed and pretended to be unwell. When David visited him, Amnon made his request. Not suspecting anything, David sent Tamar to Amnon's quarters to prepare food for him. She baked bread and served it to him, but Amnon refused to eat. He dismissed all the servants, asking Tamar to bring the food into his bedroom so that he could eat directly from her hand. Once they were alone, Amnon grabbed Tamar and demanded that she lie with him. Tamar pleaded with him, urging him not to commit such a disgraceful act. "How could you do this?" she cried. "This is a great sin, and it would bring shame upon both of us. If you wish, speak to the king, and he will allow you to marry me." But Amnon ignored her desperate pleas. In his lust, he overpowered her. Afterward, his feelings turned to hatred, stronger than the love he had once felt for her. He demanded that she leave immediately. Tamar begged him, saying, "What you are doing now is a greater wrong than what you have already done." But Amnon would not listen. He forced her out and locked the door behind her. Heartbroken and devastated, Tamar tore her robe, put ashes on her head, and went to live with her brother, Absalom. Absalom, upon learning what had happened, was furious. Tamar was desolate, overwhelmed with sorrow. She found comfort in her brother's house, but the pain of what had been done to her lingered, and the rift between the royal family deepened. When Tamar was comforted, she quietly harbored a deep hatred for Amnon. But it wasn't until David heard about the incident that the true weight of the situation became clear. He was furious, yet strangely, he did nothing to punish Amnon for his actions. It was Absalom, Tamar's brother, who felt the pain most acutely. For 2 long years, Absalom bided his time, silently planning his revenge. Then, one fateful day, Absalom hosted a feast for the royal family. It was there, in the midst of celebration, that he saw an opportunity. Absalom instructed his men to kill Amnon once he was drunk. His orders were carried out without hesitation, and Amnon was murdered. The news of his death soon reached King David, and at first, he feared that all of his sons had been killed. But it was Jonadab, a trusted friend of the royal family, who reassured David, revealing that only Amnon had died. The murder, he explained, was the result of Absalom's long-planned revenge for the violation of his sister Tamar. In the aftermath of Amnon's death, Absalom fled to Geshur, where he stayed with his grandfather for 3 years. During this time, David mourned the loss of Amnon deeply, but his heart also yearned for reconciliation with Absalom. Despite the estrangement between father and son, David longed for peace. General Joab, observing the king's distress, devised a clever plan to reunite them. He sent for a wise woman from Tekoa and instructed her to approach the king with a fabricated story, pretending to be in deep mourning. When the woman arrived at the king's court, she fell to the ground and cried, "O king, help me!" David, concerned, asked what troubled her. She began her tale. "I am a widow, and my 2 sons fought in the field. One killed the other, and now my family demands that I hand over my surviving son to be executed for murder. But if I do this, I will have no one left, and my husband's name will be lost forever." David, moved by her plight, assured her, "Leave it with me, and I will ensure no harm comes to your son." But the woman pressed further. "Why don't you extend the same mercy to your own family?" she asked. "You have banished your son Absalom, but isn't his life just as precious as the life of my son? We all die eventually, like water spilled on the ground that cannot be gathered again. Yet God seeks ways to restore us, to bring us back, and does not banish us forever." David, realizing the parallel between her story and his own, asked her, "Did Joab put you up to this?" She admitted that it was Joab's idea, and she praised the king for his wisdom in seeing through the plan. Understanding the message, David summoned Joab and told him, "Bring Absalom back." Overjoyed, Joab went to Geshur to bring Absalom home. However, David decreed that while Absalom could return to Jerusalem, he was not to come into the king's presence. Absalom, renowned throughout Israel for his striking appearance, his long hair, which weighed 3 pounds when cut, and his 3 sons and beautiful daughter Tamar, lived in relative isolation for 2 years after his return. He was not allowed to see his father, and this only fueled his frustration. Determined to meet with King David, Absalom tried repeatedly to contact Joab, but Joab ignored him. Finally, Absalom, in a bold move, ordered his servants to set fire to Joab's barley field. This drastic action caught Joab's attention. Furious, Joab demanded to know why Absalom had done such a thing. Absalom replied, "I need you to ask the king why he brought me back if he refuses to see me. If I am guilty, let him execute me." Joab relayed Absalom's words to David, and the king finally summoned his son. When Absalom came before David, he bowed low, and David greeted him with a kiss, signaling their reconciliation. But this was just the beginning of Absalom's plan. Now back in Jerusalem, he began to plot his rise to power. Absalom bought an impressive chariot and horses, hiring 50 men to run ahead of him, announcing his presence as he entered the city each day. He positioned himself at the city gate, where people came seeking justice from King David. When someone approached with a complaint, Absalom would listen intently, sympathize with their plight, and say, "You're absolutely right. But unfortunately, the king doesn't have anyone to hear your case. If I were judge, I would ensure you received the justice you deserve." He even charmed the people further by refusing to let them bow before him. Instead, he would shake their hands and greet them warmly. Through these gestures, Absalom slowly won the hearts of the people of Israel. After 4 years of building his following, Absalom asked King David for permission to go to Hebron, claiming he needed to fulfill a vow to the Lord he had made while in Geshur. David, unaware of his son's true intentions, granted his request. Once in Hebron, Absalom secretly sent spies across Israel with instructions to declare him king when they heard the trumpets blow. He invited 200 men from Jerusalem to join him as guests, none of them aware of his plot. He also enlisted Ahithophel, one of David's trusted advisors, further strengthening his rebellion. The news of the rebellion soon reached David. a messenger brought the shocking news. All of Israel is siding with Absalom in a conspiracy against you. Realizing the danger, David immediately prepared to flee. "We must leave the city at once," he told his men. "If we don't, Absalom will trap us here, and Jerusalem will be destroyed." His aides supported him, saying, "Do whatever you think is best." David left Jerusalem with his household, leaving 10 concubines behind to care for the palace. As he paused at the city's edge, his loyal troops, 600 men from Gath, led by Ittai, passed before him. David turned to Ittai, a foreigner, and said, "You don't have to go with us. You're a guest in Israel, and it's unfair to drag you into this. Return to the city, and may the Lord bless you." But Ittai, moved by his loyalty to David, replied, "I swear by God and by your life, wherever you go, I will go, even if it means death." David, deeply moved, allowed Ittai and his men to join him. As David and his followers crossed the Kidron Valley and journeyed into the countryside, the entire city of Jerusalem mourned. This chapter reminds us of the dangers of rebellion against God's plans. Absalom's rise to power and the chaos it caused serve as a powerful lesson. When we trust in God and surrender fully to His will, He provides guidance and hope, even in the darkest of times. It is a call for us to examine our own hearts, free from pride and bitterness, and to submit ourselves to God, knowing that He is the ultimate King.
Do you love meaningful Bible stories? Top 7 Bible Stories channel will bring you inspiration and peace every day. Don't forget to like and share your thoughts in the comments section. Your sharing is the motivation for us to bring more stories. Top 7 Bible Stories. Good stories, beautiful meanings.